The morning frost on December 20th, 1944, turned the Belgian countryside into a crystalline killing ground. Unteroffizier Klaus Bauer gripped the turret traverse handle inside his Panther Ausf A, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Through his commander's cupola, the woods beyond Noville appeared empty, silent, deceivingly peaceful. But Bauer knew better. Somewhere in those trees, the Americans had positioned their new hunter. The vehicle German tankers had begun calling the Geist, the Ghost. In exactly 90 seconds, Bauer would understand why that name fit perfectly. He would witness the destruction of 2 Panthers from his platoon without ever seeing the vehicle that killed them until it was far too late. And he would learn that in modern warfare, 90 seconds can feel like an eternity, while being nowhere near enough time to save your life. The frozen mud beneath his tracks had recorded the story earlier that morning. Shell casings from 76mm guns, not the heavier rounds from Shermans. Track marks showing impossible acceleration, vehicles moving at speeds no tank should achieve. And, most disturbing, the burn patterns on destroyed German armour, showing flank shots delivered with surgical precision before the German crews could even identify where the attack originated. The Americans had brought something new to the Ardennes. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. And it was hunting differently than anything German doctrine had prepared them to face. The M18 Hellcat represented a fundamental philosophical break from every other nation's approach to armoured warfare. While Germany built increasingly heavy tanks, Panthers at 45 tons, Tiger is at 57 tons, King Tigers at nearly 70 tons, American designers at General Motors' Buick division took the opposite path. They created something that defied German engineering logic. A tank destroyer weighing barely 20 tons, protected by armour so thin that 50-caliber machine gun rounds could penetrate it at close range, but capable of speeds that seemed impossible for a tracked vehicle. The genesis began in December 1941, when the United States Army Ordnance Department issued specifications that read like a contradiction. Mount a 76mm high-velocity gun capable of destroying any German tank, achieve speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, keep weight under 20 tons, and do it all while maintaining a low profile for concealment. Traditional tank designers called it impossible. Buick's engineers called it an engineering challenge and delivered the T-70 prototype in April 1943. Chief Engineer Joseph Roberts faced the reality that German doctrine created. German tank commanders expected to fight methodical engagements. Their training emphasized careful target acquisition, deliberate aiming, conservation of ammunition. Their tanks were designed for this doctrine. The Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate any American tank at 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor, 120mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, could deflect most Allied shells. It was a fortress, designed to stand and fight, but fortresses cannot chase cavalry. The M18 was built on the tank destroyer force doctrine established under General Leslie McNair on November 21, 1941. The doctrine was codified in Field Manual FM 18-5, with 3 words that became the Hellcat's operating principle: seek, strike, destroy, not hold ground, not absorb punishment, not engage in sustained firefights, find the enemy armor, kill it from ambush, and vanish before retaliation arrived. The technical specifications revealed the calculated trade-offs. Maximum armor thickness measured just 25.4 mm on the turret front, 12.7 mm on the hull sides. A German 88mm shell would not just penetrate, it would pass completely through both sides of the vehicle, turning the interior into a catastrophic kill zone. But that thin armor freed weight for the Wright R975 radial engine, originally designed for aircraft. Early production M18s, serial numbers 1 through 1350, used the naturally aspirated R975C1, producing 350 horsepower. Later models, beginning in March 1944 with serial numbers 1351 through 2507, received the supercharged R975C4 generating 400 horsepower. Combined with the vehicle's 17 to 20-ton weight, this created a power-to-weight ratio of 20 to 22.5 horsepower per ton. Compare this to German armour. The Panther managed 15 horsepower per ton. The Tiger I, with its Maybach WWII producing 690 horsepower for 57 tons, achieved just 12 horsepower per ton. The M18 Hellcat could accelerate from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds. Its top speed with governor installed reached 55 miles per hour on roads, 60 without. Cross-country, it sustained 26 miles per hour where Panthers managed 15 and Tigers barely 10. The Torquematic 900T automatic transmission gave Hellcat drivers a decisive advantage. German tank drivers operated manual transmissions requiring clutch work and gear selection during maneuvers. The Hellcat driver simply pressed the accelerator. 3 forward gears engaged automatically with ranges of up to 16 miles per hour, 12 to 34 miles per hour, and 30 to 60 miles per hour. In combat, those seconds saved by not clutching and shifting meant the difference between flanking a Panther before its turret traversed and becoming a stationary target. But speed alone did not create the 90-second problem that terrorized German tank crews. It was the combination of speed with the M18's other characteristics that made it nearly impossible to counter using traditional tactics. The turret could rotate through 360 degrees in 24 seconds using its electro-hydraulic traverse mechanism. The 76mm M1A2 gun could depress 10 degrees and elevate 20 degrees, allowing the Hellcat to fire from hull-down positions German tanks could not match. The crew of 5 operated in an open-topped turret that left them exposed to artillery fragments and small arms fire, but provided visibility that closed German turrets could not match. The commander stood behind the gunner, able to scan the entire battlefield without the tunnel vision of periscopes. The loader worked to the right of the gun, with the breech tilted 45 degrees to ease ammunition handling in the confined space. 45 rounds of main gun ammunition rode in the vehicle, 9 in the turret to the right of the gun, 18 in each sponson. The gun itself fired multiple ammunition types, each with specific tactical purposes. The M62 APCBC armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round could penetrate 93 mm of armor at 500 yards, enough to defeat Panzer IVs and the side armor of Panthers, but inadequate against Panther or Tiger frontal armor. The M93 HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing round used a tungsten carbide core and achieved 157 mm of penetration at 500 yards, but these rounds were severely rationed, with crews receiving only 1 to 2 per month due to tungsten shortages. This ammunition limitation forced M18 crews to adopt tactics that German doctrine never anticipated. They could not engage Panthers or Tigers frontally with any confidence. Standard doctrine therefore emphasized flanking attacks, using the Hellcat's superior speed to reach firing positions on German tanks' vulnerable sides or rear. A Panther's side armor measured just 40 mm, a Tiger I's side armor 60 mm. At typical engagement ranges of 800 to 1,000 meters, the M18's 76mm gun could reliably penetrate these thinner plates. But executing a flanking attack against German armor required solving the traverse problem. German tank crews in 1944 understood this vulnerability. The early Panther Ausf A, first deployed at Kursk in July 1943, featured a turret traverse system that required 60 seconds for a complete 360-degree rotation, just 6 degrees per second. German crews quickly learned that American tank destroyers, when they appeared, moved far faster than the turret could track. The Panther Ausf A, introduced in August 1943, featured an improved traverse system linked to engine RPM. At high engine speed of 2,500 RPM, the turret could complete a full rotation in 15 seconds. But the Maybach engines came from the factory, with governors limiting maximum RPM to 2,500, which extended the realistic traverse time to 18 seconds. At lower engine speeds or in low ratio, traverse times extended to 93 seconds. The Tiger I suffered even worse limitations. Its hydraulic traverse system completed a full rotation in 60 seconds at maximum speed. At low engine speed, it required 77 seconds. Should the hydraulic system fail, which happened frequently under combat stress, crews resorted to manual traverse, 720 turns of the hand wheel for a complete rotation. In combat, manual traverse meant death against a mobile opponent. These traverse times created the tactical mathematics that German tank commanders struggled to overcome. A Hellcat appearing on the flank of a German tank column forced an immediate decision tree. Identify the threat, 15 to 20 seconds, as commanders processed what they were seeing and issued orders. Traverse the turret to face the new target, 18 to 60 seconds depending on tank model and current turret position. Acquire the target through and sights and prepare to fire, 10 to 15 seconds for a trained crew. Total elapsed time, 43 to 95 seconds just to prepare a return shot. But the M18 Hellcat doctrine, taught at the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center at Camp Hood, Texas, on 158,076 acres of training ground, specified that crews should never remain stationary for more than 30 seconds after firing. The motto adopted by tank destroyer crews became their survival mantra: "Speed is life." Sergeant James Flowers of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion explained it in a 1945 interview with Army historians. In a Sherman, you absorbed hits and hoped the armor held. In a Hellcat, you avoided hits entirely or died trying. We knew every time we fired that we had maybe 30 seconds before German artillery started dropping on our position. So we fired, displaced, and fired again from somewhere they didn't expect. It wasn't about being brave. It was about understanding that our armor wouldn't save us, but our speed might. The first M18 Hellcats reached Europe in early 1944, initially seeing limited action in Italy with the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion became the first unit in the European theatre to receive M18s in May 1944, landing at Utah Beach on July 13th. But it was during the breakout from Normandy where German tank crews first encountered what would become their nightmare. On July 29, 1944, near Coutances, France, elements of German heavy tank battalions reported disturbing engagements with American tank destroyers that disappeared before the Germans could return fire. After-action reports documented enemy vehicles exhibiting speeds estimated at 80 km per hour over rough terrain, with engagement times from first shot to last visual contact approximately 92, 180 seconds. The reports were initially dismissed as combat stress or exaggeration. 80 km per hour for a tracked vehicle seemed impossible, but as more reports arrived from different sectors, all describing similar encounters, German intelligence officers realized they were facing something genuinely new. The Americans had built a vehicle that exploited the fundamental weakness in German armor doctrine. German tanks were designed to win sustained gun duels. The M18 refused to engage in gun duels at all. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of what German tankers would face for the rest of the war. On September 19th, across the Moselle River from Nancy, France, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion attached to the 4th Armoured Division encountered elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade pushing westward in a counter-offensive ordered by Adolf Hitler himself. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper commanded an M18 platoon from Company C that morning. Fog reduced visibility to 30 feet, the kind of weather that should have favoured German armour with its superior frontal protection. Leiper's platoon moved toward Réchicourt-la-Petite, on the way to Moncourt, when his lead vehicle commander spotted something that made his blood freeze. A gun muzzle, unmistakably German, emerging from the fog directly ahead at point-blank range. Traditional doctrine would have called for immediate withdrawal. You do not engage Panthers at 30 feet when your armour cannot stop their return fire. But Leiper understood the Hellcats' advantages. At this range, in this fog, the Germans could not see his other vehicles. And German tank doctrine, which emphasized methodical engagement and coordinated fire, would slow their response just long enough. Leiper deployed his platoon in a matter of seconds, using hand signals rather than radio to maintain tactical surprise. 3 M18s positioned themselves in a slight depression, hull down with only their turrets visible. The 4th moved to the flank. In 5 minutes of firing, 5 German Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade burned. The Americans lost one M18 to a lucky shot from a Panther that managed to traverse its turret before dying, but the engagement was not finished. The platoon continued firing as more German tanks appeared from the fog, drawn by the sound of combat and moving toward what they assumed was a small American force. The Panthers advanced in line, textbook German tactics for overwhelming an isolated enemy unit. What the German tank commanders did not realize was that they were silhouetting themselves against the burning wrecks behind them, providing perfect target identification for Hellcat gunners, who had rehearsed this exact scenario dozens of times at Camp Hood. By the time the fog lifted and the Germans fully understood what they faced, 10 more Panthers littered the battlefield. The Americans had lost 2 additional M18s, but the exchange ratio told the story. 12 American crew casualties against perhaps 60 Germans killed or wounded. More importantly, the German counter-offensive had stalled for hours, while commanders regrouped and attempted to determine how many American tank destroyers they actually faced. Sergeant Henry Hartmann commanded one of the M18s in Leiper's platoon that day. His after-action report, preserved in National Archives records, detailed the tactical sequence. We fired on the first Panther from about 200 yards, struck it in the side between the road wheels and turret ring. Penetration and fire. We displaced immediately, maybe 200 meters to the left flank, and engaged another Panther that was traversing to find us. Hit it in the rear deck. Displacement again before their infantry could get mortars on our first position. 6 kills that day, and I never stayed in one spot longer than the time it took to fire, and reverse out. The 90-second window was not theoretical. It was the measured time between when a Hellcat revealed its position by firing and when German return fire arrived. At the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center, instructors broke down the timing with brutal clarity. If you fired and remained stationary, German artillery observers would have your coordinates within 30 seconds. Shells would arrive within 60 to 90 seconds. If you engaged German tanks directly, their turret traverse, target acquisition, and return fire would arrive in 40 to 90 seconds depending on their model and current disposition. Therefore, doctrine specified the sequence: identify target, fire no more than 2 rounds, displace to pre-selected secondary position at maximum speed, prepare to fire again from new position. The entire cycle should complete in under 30 seconds from the moment of firing. Crews drilled on this sequence until it became instinctive. Commanders pre-selected displacement routes and secondary firing positions before ever engaging. Drivers kept the engine at operating RPM so acceleration would be instantaneous. Loaders had the next round chambered before the first round even struck its target. The training at Camp Hood incorporated lessons learned from early North African campaigns, where American tank destroyers had suffered catastrophic losses trying to engage German armor in sustained firefights. The M6 gun motor carriage, mounting a 37mm gun on a Dodge truck, had proven suicidal against even light German tanks. The M3 gun motor carriage, a 75mm gun on an M3 half-track, offered better firepower but remained lightly armoured and vulnerable. These early failures refined the doctrine that would govern M18 employment. Tank destroyers were not tanks. They should not fight like tanks. They were specialized anti-armor weapons designed for ambush, not assault. The open-topped turret, while leaving crews exposed, provided 360-degree visibility that closed turrets could not match. The thin armor, while offering minimal protection, enabled the speed that made the entire concept viable. Crews learned to read terrain like predators. They identified hull-down positions that concealed the vehicle while allowing the gun to fire. They memorized displacement routes that used terrain masking to break line of sight with the enemy. They practiced firing from reverse slope positions, where only the gun breached the ridgeline, making return fire nearly impossible. And they understood that in the M18, the first rule was, never be where the enemy expected you. German tank commanders struggled to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. Traditional armoured tactics emphasized concentration of force, coordinated maneuver, and sustained firepower. German doctrine trained commanders to identify enemy positions. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Suppress them with artillery and machine gun fire. Then assault with concentrated armor supported by infantry. But this doctrine assumed the enemy would remain in position long enough to be fixed and destroyed. The M18 Hellcat broke this assumption. It fired from unexpected positions, displaced before German fires could arrive, and reappeared elsewhere on the battlefield, seemingly at random. German after-action reports from late 1944 repeatedly mentioned the confusion this caused. Commanders reported engaging what they believed were 4 or 5 American tank destroyers, only to realize later through track analysis that they had faced perhaps 2 vehicles moving rapidly between multiple firing positions. Unteroffizier Klaus Bauer of Panzer Lehr Division recorded in his personal diary on December 15, 1944, one day before the Ardennes offensive began. The Americans have a new hunter. We hear them, but never see them. By the time we traverse our turret, they are gone. Yesterday, 3 Tigers destroyed in 1 hour, all flanking shots. No one saw the American vehicles until after they had fired and displaced. How do you fight an enemy who refuses to be seen? The Battle of the Bulge would answer Wendel's question with brutal clarity. It would also demonstrate that the 90-second tactical window was not just a theoretical construct, but a measured reality that German tankers learned to fear. On December 19, 1944, Team de Sobry, a battalion-sized task force from the 10th Armoured Division, raced north from Bastogne to defend the village of Noville against elements of the German 2nd Panzer Division. Major William de Sobry commanded approximately 400 men, a handful of Sherman tanks, and 4 M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion that arrived just as darkness fell. The Germans had 16,000 men and over 120 tanks moving on Bastogne, and Noville sat directly in their path. The tactical situation seemed hopeless. 4 M18 Hellcats and perhaps a dozen Shermans against an entire panzer division. German doctrine would have called for concentrated assault, overwhelming the thin American line through sheer weight of numbers. But what happened instead became one of the defining engagements of the Battle of the Bulge, and a case study in how mobility and tactical aggression could defeat numerical superiority. The morning of December 20th dawned cold and foggy, visibility restricted to a few hundred meters. German artillery pounded Noville starting at 0400 hours, a standard preparation for armoured assault. At 0630, Panther and Panzer IV tanks began moving on the village from the north and northeast, supported by Panzer Grenadier infantry. The first wave consisted of roughly 30 tanks advancing in line. The M18 Hellcats did not wait in prepared defensive positions. That was Sherman doctrine, and Shermans had the armour to survive return fire. The Hellcats operated according to their training. They had pre-selected firing positions on the flanks of the German advance, locations with multiple displacement routes already identified. As the German armour concentrated on the Shermans defending the village centre, the M18s struck from unexpected angles. The first Hellcat engaged at 600 metres, hitting a Panzer IV in the side and immediately displacing. German commanders, focused on the direct threat to their front, took precious seconds to even register that they were under fire from the flank. By the time Panthers began traversing their turrets to engage the threat, the Hellcat had moved 300 metres to a secondary position and fired again, destroying another Panzer IV. The German response followed doctrine. Suppress the threat with artillery, manoeuvre supporting armour to engage. But the artillery coordinates were for positions the Hellcats had already abandoned. The supporting armour found empty firing positions, and while German attention focused on hunting the mobile American tank destroyers, the Shermans in Noville picked off German tanks that had exposed their flanks while searching for the Hellcats. Over the course of December 19th and 20th, the 4 M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, supported by the 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment and elements of Team de Sobry, destroyed at least 30 German tanks. A military channel documentary credited the M18S specifically with 24 confirmed kills, including several Tiger tanks. German casualties exceeded 500 to 1,000 men killed or wounded. More significantly, the German advance stalled. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had orders to seize key highways and fuel dumps northwest of Bastogne, spent 2 crucial days attempting to clear Noville of what intelligence estimated to be a much larger American force. By the time the Americans withdrew from Noville on December 20th, the Germans had lost the initiative. The delay allowed the 101st Airborne Division to establish a perimeter around Bastogne, setting the stage for the siege that would become legendary. The tactical success at Noville demonstrated every principle of M18 doctrine. The Hellcats used their speed to reach threatened sectors faster than German armour could exploit gaps. They engaged from unexpected positions, using terrain and mobility to compensate for their lack of armour protection. They fired and displaced according to the 30-second rule, never remaining in one position long enough for German artillery to find them. And they confused German commanders by creating the impression of a much larger force through rapid movement between multiple firing positions. German tank commander accounts from Noville reveal the psychological impact of facing an enemy that operated by different rules. Oberleutnant Karl Fischer of the 2nd Panzer Division wrote in a report dated December 23rd, "The American tank destroyers appeared to be everywhere at once. We would engage what we believed to be their position, only to receive fire from an entirely different direction. By the time we traversed to face the new threat, they had displaced again. It was like fighting ghosts." The 90-second window governed every engagement. German crews needed 40 to 90 seconds to traverse, acquire, and fire. American doctrine specified displacement within 30 seconds of firing. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. As long as Hellcat crews maintained discipline and executed their training, German tanks could not catch them. The moment a Hellcat remained stationary for too long, German firepower would destroy it. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's performance at Bastogne validated the entire tank destroyer force concept. Throughout the siege, from December 20th through January 18th, 1945, the battalion destroyed approximately 40 German tanks while losing only 6 M18s. The kill ratio exceeded 6-1, the highest of any American armoured unit in the European theatre. And this success came not from superior armour or gun penetration, but from superior mobility and tactical employment. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 1944, German forces made a major push to break through American lines around Bastogne. 18 Panzer IVs from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, with infantry riding on their decks, penetrated the defensive perimeter held by the 327th Glider Infantry. The situation appeared critical. German armour was inside the American defensive line, exactly the breakthrough scenario that could collapse the entire Bastogne defence. The M18 Hellcats of the 705th responded according to doctrine. They did not attempt to absorb the German assault. They manoeuvred. Using roads that the Germans had not yet cut, the Hellcats moved at speeds approaching 50 miles per hour to positions on the flanks of the German penetration. The Panzer IVs, focused on exploiting their breakthrough toward Bastogne centre, did not detect the threat until M18 rounds began striking their side armour. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. By the time German infantry realised they were under attack from multiple directions, 15 of the 18 Panzer IVs burned. The remaining 3 attempted to reverse out of the penetration, but American bazooka teams and the Hellcats caught them in a crossfire. Not a single German tank escaped. American losses included 2 M18s damaged but recoverable, with crew casualties at 3 wounded, none killed. This was the tactical revolution that the M18 Hellcat represented. Not better armour, not a bigger gun, but a fundamental reconception of how to fight armoured vehicles. While Germany pursued ever heavier tanks as the solution to Allied numerical superiority, America pursued speed and tactic flexibility. The irony was that German doctrine created the conditions for its own defeat. Every ton of armour added to Panthers and Tigers made them slower, less manoeuvrable, more vulnerable to the very tactics the M18 embodied. The production numbers tell their own story. From July 1943 through October 1944, Buick's Flint, Michigan plant produced exactly 2,507 M18 Hellcats in just 15 months. Peak production reached 267 units in November 1943. Compare this to German Panther production, which struggled to reach 90 units monthly by late 1944, despite 3 years of production effort and 6,000 total Panthers built. Germany's industrial challenges extended beyond raw numbers. Each Panther required approximately 300,000 man-hours to build. Quality control suffered as experienced workers were drafted for military service. Critical component shortages, particularly in high-grade steel and specialized electronics, meant Panthers often reached frontline units with known mechanical deficiencies that would require field repairs before combat readiness. The M18, by contrast, used proven automotive production techniques. Buick engineers employed assembly line methods refined through decades of civilian car manufacturing. Components came from established suppliers across American industry. The Wright R975 engine was the same power plant used in M4 Sherman tanks, meaning spare parts flowed through existing supply chains. Torque-matic transmissions came from commercial truck production. The 76mm gun was already in production for Sherman 76 models. This industrial efficiency meant that when an M18 was lost in combat, replacement vehicles arrived within weeks. When German Panthers were destroyed, replacement became increasingly unlikely as the war progressed. German tank crews in late 1944 knew that every Panther lost represented irreplaceable combat power. American crews knew that losses would be made good through the industrial machine that outproduced the entire Axis combined. But beyond production numbers and tactical successes, the M18 Hellcat represented a psychological shift in how armies conceptualized armored warfare. The tank destroyer force motto, "Seek, Strike, Destroy," implied an aggressive hunter mentality fundamentally different from defensive anti-tank doctrine. Where British tank destroyers like the Archer served primarily in defensive roles, and Soviet heavy tanks absorbed damage through thick armor, the American approach emphasized offensive action and active defense through mobility. This philosophy extended beyond the vehicle itself into crew training and tactical employment. Tank destroyer crews at Camp Hood learned to think like predators, not prey. They studied German tank tactics to identify vulnerabilities. They rehearsed displacement drills until 30-second repositioning became instinctive. They practiced firing from unexpected positions, using terrain features that German doctrine did not emphasize. The psychological impact on German tank crews cannot be overstated. By late 1944, German tactical reports reveal a consistent pattern of hesitation and caution when American tank destroyers were reported in a sector. Commanders delayed advances to conduct reconnaissance for Hellcat positions. Armor moved with infantry screens to provide warning of flank attacks. Time and combat power were expended on defensive measures against a threat that might not even be present. This defensive mindset represented the ultimate success of M18 doctrine. The Hellcat did not need to destroy every German tank to achieve strategic effect. It simply needed to exist as a threat, forcing German commanders to fight cautiously when operational success required aggressive action. During the Ardennes offensive, this caution contributed to the failure of German spearheads to maintain momentum. Hours and days were lost to reconnaissance and security measures against possible Hellcat ambushes. Intercepted German radio communications from late December 1944 reveal commanders requesting confirmation that no American tank destroyers were present before committing armored reserves. These delays, sometimes extending to several hours, allowed American forces to reinforce threatened sectors and establish defensive positions. The mere possibility of facing M18 Hellcats paralyzed German decision-making at critical moments. The technical specifications that made this possible were straightforward enough. The M18's top speed of 55 miles per hour meant it could cover over 1.5 miles in under 2 minutes. Its acceleration from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds meant it could sprint from concealment to firing position before enemy crews could react. Its turret traverse of 360 degrees in 24 seconds meant it could engage targets across a wide arc without repositioning the hull. But the real advantage came from integrating these capabilities into coherent doctrine. A Panther might be faster than a Hellcat in absolute terms if given a long straight road, but battlefields are not racetracks. They are terrain cluttered with obstacles, elevation changes, tree lines, and buildings that break line of sight. In this environment, the Hellcat's acceleration, maneuverability, and ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch meant it could reach firing positions that heavier German tanks could not access. The ground pressure advantage proved particularly significant during the winter of 1944–45. Snow and mud that bogged down 57-ton Tiger is, with their 15.2 pounds per square inch ground pressure, barely slowed the M18. While German armour struggled to manoeuvre off improved roads, Hellcats moved cross-country, using terrain Germans assumed was impassable. This mobility enabled flank attacks that German doctrine never anticipated because their own vehicles could not execute similar manoeuvres. Former M18 Commander Lieutenant Robert Luppi of the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion explained it in a 1946 interview. "We could go places Panthers couldn't follow. Through mud, over rough terrain, through forests. We'd hit them from directions their commanders didn't think armour could approach from. By the time they realised we'd flanked them through what they thought was impassable ground, we'd already fired and were moving to the next position." The casualties tell a more sobering story. Of the 2,507 M18s produced, approximately 526 were lost to all causes during the war. Combat losses accounted for roughly 216 vehicles, approximately 21% of production. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M18s suffered casualty rates comparable to infantry units, far higher than conventional tank battalions. The open turret meant that when a Hellcat was hit, crew survival depended on bailout speed measured in seconds. Yet crews continued volunteering for M18 units. The psychological calculus was different from other armoured vehicles. In a Sherman, you absorbed hits and hoped your armour would protect you. Survival felt passive, dependent on whether enemy gunners got lucky. In a Hellcat, survival felt active. You controlled whether the enemy ever got a shot. The thin armour was not a flaw to be accepted, but a trade-off for the speed that kept you alive. Crews understood that they would rather avoid being hit entirely than survive being hit. Technical Sergeant Daniel Mason, who served with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion through the entire European campaign, put it simply in a 1945 after-action interview. "I watched Shermans burn when they thought their armour would save them. I watched Hellcats escape when they trusted their speed instead." The M18 gave you agency. You decided whether to engage or withdraw, when to fire, and when to relocate. That feeling of control made all the difference. The final combat record supports this assessment. American tank destroyer battalions, equipped with M18 Hellcats, reported a combined total of over 526 confirmed enemy vehicle kills, against 216 M18s lost in combat, producing a kill ratio of approximately 2.4 to 1. This exceeded the performance of M10 and M36 tank destroyers, and significantly exceeded the kill ratios of M4 Sherman tanks when employed in anti-tank roles. Individual units performed even better. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion reported destroying 90-plus enemy armoured vehicles during the European campaign, while losing fewer than 20 M18s to enemy action. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved similar results. These units received their success not through superior equipment in absolute terms, but through superior employment of equipment designed specifically for their tactical mission. The German response to the Hellcat threat revealed the limitations of their own doctrine. Attempts to increase Panther and Tiger traverse speeds through mechanical modifications achieved marginal improvements, but could not overcome fundamental design limitations. Increasing engine RPM limits provided faster traverse, but increased mechanical failures. The Tiger II achieved 19-second traverse times at 2000 RPM, but sustaining high RPM in combat conditions caused transmission and final drive failures that already plagued German heavy tanks. German tactical responses proved more effective but came too late. By early 1945, German armoured doctrine began emphasizing infantry screening of armoured advances, specifically to counter American tank destroyer flanking attacks. Panthers and Tigers moved with supporting infantry units deployed on their flanks, providing early warning of Hellcat positions. This defensive posture reduced losses to ambush, but also reduced the offensive mobility that made German armour dangerous in the first place. The philosophical implications extended beyond World War II. The M18 Hellcat demonstrated that in mechanized warfare, mobility could trump protection when doctrine and training integrated speed into tactical employment. Post-war armies studied Hellcat operations and incorporated lessons into their own anti-tank doctrines. The concept of shoot and scoot, firing from concealment then immediately displacing before return fire arrived, became standard doctrine for anti-tank weapons worldwide. Modern anti-tank guided missile systems employ tactics directly descended from M18 doctrine. TOW missiles, Javelin systems, NLAW launchers all operate on the principle of engaging from concealment, firing, and immediately displacing before enemy forces can target the launch position. The technology changed from kinetic penetrators to guided missiles, but the tactical employment remained unchanged. Mobility and surprise trump armour when you control the terms of engagement. The Swedish Struve 103, Italian B1 Centauro, American M1, 128, Striker MGS, all represent evolutionary descendants of the M18 concept. Wheeled or lightly tracked vehicles mounting powerful guns, designed for rapid deployment and hit-and-run tactics rather than sustained combat. The armour remains thin, the emphasis remains on mobility. The doctrine remains focused on firing from unexpected positions and displacing before retaliation. For German tank crews in 1944 and 1945, the 90-second window became a measured countdown to survival. From the moment they heard the distinctive whine of a Wright R975 engine or saw muzzle flash from an unexpected direction, they had perhaps 40 to 90 seconds to traverse their turret, acquire the target, and return fire. The Americans who crewed M18 Hellcats had 30 seconds to fire and displace before German artillery or return fire arrived at their position. This was not symmetric warfare. This was a calculated exploitation of enemy doctrine and mechanical limitations. The Germans built fortresses on tracks. The Americans built cavalry that struck and vanished. The fortresses could not catch the cavalry. The cavalry refused to siege the fortresses. And in that fundamental mismatch of tactical philosophy lay the outcome of thousands of engagements across Western Europe. The last M18 Hellcat rolled off the Buick assembly line in October 1944, but its legacy outlived not just World War II, but the entire Cold War, and continues into modern doctrine. The vehicle demonstrated that victory does not require the best armour or the biggest gun. Victory requires the right equipment, properly employed, operated by crews trained to exploit every advantage while compensating for every weakness. The 90 seconds that German tankers had before M18 Hellcats vanished at 55 miles per hour represented more than a tactical problem. It represented the collision of two incompatible philosophies of warfare. German doctrine, perfected over 5 years of war, emphasized methodical engagement, coordinated fire, and overwhelming force concentrated at decisive points. This doctrine had conquered Poland, France, and vast stretches of the Soviet Union. The M18 Hellcat broke every rule of this doctrine. It refused to fight where German forces concentrated. It engaged from positions German doctrine did not anticipate. It destroyed German armour not through superior protection or firepower, but through speed and tactical surprise. And it vanished before German doctrine could bring overwhelming force to bear. In those 90 seconds, German tank crews learned that sometimes the enemy simply will not fight the way your training prepared you to fight them. For the Americans who crewed these vehicles, the 90-second window was not a limitation but an opportunity. 30 seconds to fire, 60 additional seconds before German return fire could arrive. That was all the time they needed. Fire, displace, survive. Repeat until the enemy stopped advancing or your battalion ran out of ammunition. The mathematics were brutal but clear. As long as you moved faster than the enemy could react, you controlled the engagement. The moment you became stationary, you became a target. The frozen fields of Belgium, the forests of the Ardennes, the roads of Germany in 1945, all witnessed the same tactical sequence repeated hundreds of times. A German armoured column advancing along a road, the sudden crack of 76mm gunfire from an unexpected angle, a Panther or Tiger struck in the side, ammunition cooking off, crew bailing out if they had time, German commanders shouting coordinates, turrets traversing, infantry deploying, and by the time return fire arrived, the position was empty. The Hellcat had already covered 500 metres, repositioned, and prepared to fire again from a new angle. German after-action reports from late 1944 through the war's end contain repeated phrases. Enemy position abandoned before artillery could engage. Tank destroyer displaced before return fire. Unable to fix enemy vehicles in place for counterattack. These phrases appear in reports from Normandy, the Bulge, the Rhineland, and southern Germany. They represent the consistent failure of German doctrine to adapt to an enemy that fought by different rules. The supreme irony is that Germany's pursuit of ever heavier tanks created the perfect conditions for the M18 Hellcat to succeed. Every ton of armour added to Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers made them slower, less manoeuvrable, more vulnerable to flank attacks they could not respond to quickly enough. The Panther at 45 tons was already slower than the 30-ton M4 Sherman. At 57 tons, the Tiger I struggled in any terrain softer than paved road. At 69.8 tons, the King Tiger was nearly immobile in mud or snow, tethered to improved roads like ships to harbour channels. The M18 Hellcat at 20 tons moved freely. It went where German armour could not follow. It struck where German armour could not easily manoeuvre, and it disappeared before German armour could bring its superior guns and protection to bear. The mathematical equation was simple. If you cannot bring your advantages to the engagement, they provide no benefit. German superiority in armour thickness and gun penetration meant nothing when the Hellcat engaged from positions the German tanks could not quickly respond to. In the final accounting, the M18 Hellcat destroyed over 526 German armoured vehicles while losing 216 M18s in combat. Individual German tanks possessed superior armour and comparable or better firepower. Individual German crews were often well-trained and experienced, but individual superiority means nothing when tactical employment negates those advantages. The Hellcat won not because it was better protected or better armed, but because it was employed according to doctrine that understood its strengths and compensated for its weaknesses. The 90 seconds that German tankers had before M18 Hellcats vanished at 55 miles per hour taught a lesson that echoes through military doctrine to this day. Speed is a weapon, mobility is armour, surprise is firepower, and the vehicle that controls the terms of engagement wins, regardless of who has thicker steel or larger caliber guns. The Germans built magnificent tanks, the Americans built the Wright tank destroyer, and in the frozen fields of Europe in 1944 and 45, Wright proved more valuable than magnificent. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.